Hello, and welcome to the Daily Rings of Power podcast, your not-so-daily dose of the latest news, rumours, and speculation about the Lord of the Rings of Power. The day is Saturday, December 23rd, and I'm your host, Harry. I hope you're having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. It is such a pleasure to be back recording for this podcast, and I am not exaggerating when I say that this is the most excited I've ever been to release an episode. And that is because today we have our first ever interview with one of the production crew from the Rings of Power. After our usual introduction, you'll be hearing my conversation with Alex Disenhof, the cinematographer for episodes 6 and 7 of Season 1. In the interview, we talk about Alex's journey from watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy on the big screen to getting the call to work on the show, and all the incredible craft, artistry, and teamwork that goes into making a show of this scale. Alex provided so much insight into the Herculean effort it takes to bring our favourite stories to life, and he shares some exclusive information about the making of these episodes. But I am fond of tradition, and just because we've been away for a while, that doesn't mean we can start an episode without a reading from the Professor's work. Today's reading comes from The Lord of the Rings, Book 6, The Steward and the King. In those days the companions of the Ring dwelt together in a fair house with Gandalf, and they went to and fro as they wished. And Frodo said to Gandalf, "Do you know what this day is that Aragorn speaks of? For we are happy here, and I don't wish to go, but the days are running away, and Bilbo is waiting, and the Shire is my home."
"As for Bilbo," said Gandalf, "he is waiting for the same day, and he knows what keeps you. And as for the passing of the days, it is now only May, and high summer is not yet in. And though all things may seem changed, as if an age of the world had gone by, yet to the trees and the grass it is less than a year since you set out."
"Pippin," said Frodo, "didn't you say that Gandalf was less close than of old? He was weary of his labours then, I think. Now he is recovering."
And Gandalf said, "Many folk like to know beforehand what is to be set on the table, but those who have laboured to prepare the feast like to keep their secret. For wonder makes the words of praise louder, and Aragorn himself waits for a sign."
I chose that reading for two reasons. Firstly, I found Gandalf's words about the passing of a year seeming like an age has gone by very poignant for us fans who have been waiting a year since the last season of the show. It can feel like an age at times. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, whilst we'd all like to know what will be set on the table for us in the Rings of Power's second season, we should never forget, wonder makes the words of praise louder. Now, without further ado, let's get into our interview with Alex. My guest today is one of the key figures behind bringing episodes 6 and 7 of the Rings of Power Season 1 to our screens. Alex Disenhof burst onto the scene in 2012 as the cinematographer for Michel Gondry's feature film The We and the I. Since then, he's been director of photography on over a dozen films and television shows, with highlights including HBO's Watchmen, Fox's The Exorcist series, and Apple TV's Mosquito Coast. And for all of those music fans among our listeners, I do believe I'm right in saying that Alex's music video credits include Taylor Swift's Style. So a little one there for all the Swifties.
That is true.
And of course, his work has been widely acclaimed, having received multiple nominations for Best Cinematography from the ASC Awards and Camera Image. And in 2021, Alex became the youngest active member of the American Society of Cinematographers. Alex Disenhof, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. That's quite the intro. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, I think I have to give credit to you because a lot of that was taken from your website. So I think really you've just done a very good job. And who knows? Maybe we'll find a way to connect Taylor Swift and the Rings of Power at some point over the
Oh
next decade.
gosh, yeah,
No pressure.
we can
No
give it a
pressure.
go. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, let's dive right in. Now, as I do whenever I have a guest come on the show, I always like to ask what your first introduction to Tolkien was. And I don't really know the background with you. So before working on the Rings of Power, did you have a connection to Tolkien's works at all through the books, films, or?
I did, yeah. I mean, I think so. A lot of people of my generation, I graduated high school in 2005, and so the films came out when I was in high school. They were a huge, huge part of kind of my decision to want to become a filmmaker. I became, obsessed with the behind the scenes, and I just loved the world they created. And I think those films for a whole generation of people sparked
Mm,
interest in Tolkien and in filmmaking. And so then I went back and I read all of his books, and I, kind of did a deep dive. I have a twin sister as well who's even bigger, way bigger fanatic than I am. Actually, she knows everything. And so she was very excited that I got to work on the show, and I mean, it was a dream to get the call to work
mm,
on the show. Like I said, so I remember like sitting in the theater during the Return of the King, and the Rohirrim are up on the hillside ready to charge, and I just thought to myself, this is what I want to do. Like, this is so cool. There's something about that. I remember that moment,
mm.
and so yeah, it was pretty surreal to be able to get the call and return to Middle Earth and kind of help, you know uh continue the legacy of Tolkien in cinema and TV. So
Yeah.
it was really cool.
Absolutely. I think, we've heard obviously from a lot of the cast, a lot of the crew, similar experiences where 20 years ago it was sitting in the cinema. I had the same. I was a little bit younger, but I remember where I was sitting in those cinemas, probably too young to be watching the films, but having that same experience all the same. And as you said, the behind the scenes, which I think really kind of revolutionized what it was like for audiences to see what went into making this kind of film.
Yeah.
So I can completely understand how that would have got you into it. And so jumping forward, as you said,
Yeah.
many, many years later,
Mhm.
you come back to it. How did you end up getting involved with it? What was the call like? What was your first introduction to the production of the Rings of Power?
Yeah, I guess it starts I was me walking around a small city in Mexico. I was on an off day shooting the Mosquito Coast for Apple.
Mm,
And I just got a call out of the blue, and I think I can't remember if it was my agent or if it was one of the producers, but basically they called and said, "Hey, do you want to do the Rings of Power?" And I just was like, "Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a no-brainer." It was surreal. I don't know how they got my info. I don't know. I never asked. I still haven't asked after all these years, and I've become close with, everybody who makes the show. And I've still never quite asked them how my name got thrown in the mix. But yeah, so I took the call. I said, I'd love to talk more about it. We had one more call. Um, this was in early 2020, before the pandemic. And they described the show. They said, "Hey, you're gonna, we want you to do this kind of two block chunk of episodes in season one that are kind of the apex of the season. Um, we can't tell you anything about it, but do you want to fly to New Zealand, and do this?" And again, being a massive Lord of the Rings fan, and a
mm.
fan of Tolkien's work, there wasn't a decision to be made. It was obvious, it was, of
Didn't take
course,
much persuading.
no. And they said, this is the biggest show that's ever been made, and from a filmmaking perspective, the resources and from the kind of the support that you'll have, it's unlike anything you've probably experienced. So
Yeah.
yeah, all those things uh, kind of happened in quick succession, and then COVID hit, and it was a year before I actually went to New Zealand.
Right.
So that carrot was kind of dangling for about a year before I could go.
You're just thinking,
Yeah.
don't get sick, don't get anything that can stop me from going to New Zealand.
Yeah, well, and that's a real thing because you had to do like a 6 month period where you book your hotel room in New Zealand,
Mm.
um, and it was these coveted spots, for quarantining. And so if you were to somehow miss your flight or whatever, you know, that would have been it. I would have just not got the job because I wouldn't have
Mm.
been able to get into the country for another, 6 months. So the few weeks right before that flight were very nerve-wracking, making sure I didn't get anything. So
Well, thank
yeah,
goodness you made it there then, because that would have been one
yeah,
flight you didn't want to miss.
yes, yeah,
But that kind of leads me into a couple of questions. One, which is obviously these two episodes, episodes 6 and 7, you worked with Charlotte Bransfrom, and who I think I'm right in saying you hadn't worked with before. So, what was that like collaborating with Charlotte? What was she like to work with as a director?
Oh, I couldn't be more fortunate to have such a great collaborator. Like you said, we had never met, we had never worked together. 2 weeks after we got out of quarantine in New Zealand, we were out on the top of Mount Cook in New Zealand shooting
Mm.
scenes on top of the mountain. I mean, it was like trial by fire. And she's just such a wonderful human being, but also just a really confident leader and filmmaker. I think the cast and crew all loved Charlotte, and it's always a bit of a risk. You never know. Filmmaking is community art making, and
Mm.
you hope that you can assemble a team of people who um, have are like-minded to you in the way you like to work, and to me, kindness and respect are really important,
Mm.
because doing what we do is very difficult. We're away from our families often, and we're working really long hours, and
Mm.
there's an immense amount of pressure. And so to have nice people to do it with is really important. And Charlotte is just the best. And I think, I don't know if you've spoken to other cast and crew. I can't imagine they've said anything else different about Charlotte. She's just so wonderful. So
I mean, that's great to
yeah,
hear as well. I think going back to our earlier conversation about, watching behind the scenes for those Peter Jackson films, that was one of the things you loved seeing was this tight-knit group of cast, crew, everyone from
yeah.
the art department to the film. And it seems from everything I've heard and everything I've spoken to that the team on the Rings of Power, from the filmmakers, the actors, you also, partially, I imagine, because of that COVID situation, you had that real tight-knit, collaborative team to work with.
Yeah, I mean, you become a family. I think any job you become a family, but this one's particularly um, special because of the amount of time and the amount of shoot days. I mean, this show shoots longer than anything else that I know out there in terms of, the length of the production is long, and you're with these people more than you're with your family. So they become a family, and I think everyone also recognizes how lucky they are to be able to be a part of something like this, and everyone really is giving it everything they have to make it the best they can, and uh, it's a real collaboration between all departments and actors, and the producers and the writers. Yeah,
Absolutely. And just, take a step back for a second, because I realize that as we're having this conversation and before we go diving into all the nitty gritty of these two episodes, one of the things I thought about was, as you said, these are collaborative team exercises in a way that is almost unparalleled with other industries. And a lot of our audience might be sitting there going, well, I know of the title cinematographer, and I know that a director of photography appears in the credits, but there might be a lot of our listeners sitting there going, I don't actually know what that job is. So would you be able, Alex, to just kind of explain what that role is on a production?
sure. Yes, that's a good question. So it's another way to put it is I'm the director of the image, right?
Mm.
So I am responsible for creating mood and telling the story through lighting, through camera movement. I work very closely with the director and the actors to block out the scenes, figure out where the actor's going to move, where the camera is going to be placed, what lenses we use. I work with the production designer who designs the sets and the costume designer who does the costumes for, working with figuring out what color palettes we want on camera. Work with the makeup department for the same thing. So really anything in the purview of the image is my responsibility. So it's the real, for me, it's the fun part of making the movie because it's your, all of these incredible artisans' work kind of
Mm.
gets funneled through my lens. And I think
Yeah.
that's for me an enormous responsibility, but and something really fun and something there's always a process of discovery and every shot, every day is different. Every shot is different. Every scene is a kind of new puzzle to figure out.
Well, it's that thing, isn't it, where I think, for a lot of viewers, you kind of sit there, you sit in front of your TV and you see the moving images, you see the screen, and you kind of go, well, they've pointed a camera at that, and that's what it looked like, and now it's come back to me as the viewer. But of course, there's so much
Yeah,
more that goes into it, months and months of work even leading up to it. And I guess
yeah.
in that kind of line of thought, how early on
Hmm.
were you involved kind of before you even set foot on set and started filming in terms of working with whether that's production designers, set designers,
Yeah.
concept artists?
Yeah, I mean, it was a crash course for, no, most productions, I would say, like in even season two, I was on board earlier because I was the lead cinematographer on season two. So I got like 12 weeks of prep, which is pretty, but you
Yeah.
need as much time as you can. This year, or season one, because I came in later, I it was trial by fire. We had 2 weeks of quarantine where they sent me a laptop with like all the information on it, and I could read the scripts. I could kind of I would have meetings every day with various department heads, getting to know everyone.
Mm.
And then as soon as we hit the ground, Charlotte and I, toured all of the sets that were existing. We talked about the sets that were to be built. We started scouting locations to figure out where we were going to shoot. And it was a very intense process because again, then we flew 2 weeks later, we flew to the South Island. We were shooting our scenes on top of the mountain.
Mm.
We did a few days of that, came back to Auckland, took a few more weeks of prep, and then went straight into shooting some other stuff. I want to say we shot the post volcano beginning of episode 7. I think was pretty soon after that,
Yeah.
which required it. Actually, I can send you a link. There's a great piece, 17-minute piece that Airy,
Yes.
the camera company, made
It's brilliant.
about that. So,
Yeah,
um,
I'll
you
add that in
know,
the show notes for viewers who haven't seen it. But it's a brilliant video understanding some of the technical elements with the lenses, with the practical effects, everything, lighting, and it's a real fantastic insight. I remember watching that when it came out and just really brilliant. And you'll get to hear more from Alex, which is obviously a treat. So kind of going from that and staying in that vein, one of the things that I think Tolkien and specifically its adaptations have become famous for is the kind of moving from those initial concept art images to the final shots. And you have the famous artists like John Howe and Alan Lee. And obviously, since the show's come out, we've seen a lot of the concept art that was done for the show and been able to compare it with the final shots. And, a lot of us have been sitting around going, wow, that is just about as close as I could imagine it being. What's that process like working with whether it's the artists themselves or just the concept art and getting from that point where you've got a beautiful drawing and say, right, I've now got to recreate that on screen?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's an interesting process because um, I guess the main thing is well, first of all, it's a fantastic thing to have as a cinematographer to have this kind of inspiration right there in front of you being drawn by these beautiful artists who have made these incredible pieces that serve as great a great communication tool between departments saying, hey, this is what we're after, but also as inspiration for other ideas. um, we were never, as a cinematographer, I was never told, hey, you need to make the image look just like this art, the lighting has to be like this or whatever. But the art usually was so good that
Mm,
to me it was like, well, this is a great starting point for what the look we're after. They really oftentimes really considered the light and the color and the tones in a beautiful way. And so it was a great thing to show my department heads, my lighting crew and my camera crew to, understand what we were going for. Most shows don't have that. This
Sure.
was unique, to have these artists. And I think, someone told in the art department said, we're the department that never sleeps because there were so many artists from all around the world working on the show and so many different time zones that they literally, there was always somebody in the art department up and
Mm,
working on the show, no matter what time of day it was. So,
yeah.
yeah, they served an incredible inspiration for us. Um, they're works of art in themselves. I mean, they really are.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and if you know anyone in the production who might be able to put in a good word, we'd all love a book with the concept art. So if you can pass on
Oh,
that, we'd all
me
love to
too.
have a something at the coffee
I will
table.
ask them too because I would love that. I actually was like, I thought about it 2 years ago when I did it. I was
Yeah.
like, man, I wish I could give my sister this for a Christmas
Oh,
present, but obviously I can't. But yeah, I think we'd probably all love that, wouldn't we? Someone at Amazon's gotta,
it's great
make
seeing it
some
on
calls.
screen, but there's something about having a coffee table book that you can just kind of sit on a rainy day and look at and be
Yeah,
transported. But you
yeah,
you kind of referenced something there, which I think is very interesting. What you said, this level of production, this level of resources you don't get on every
mhm,
show. Obviously, there's budgets, there's time
yeah,
constraints, there's all these different things. And a lot has been made about The Rings of Power being, quote unquote, the most expensive show I've ever produced, the biggest show I've ever produced. From your experience working on that, could you
yeah.
feel that on set and in the process, in the production process from the resources? Or to a certain extent, does it also come down to it's like any other filmmaking? It is getting on set, it's shooting the coverage, it's getting the lighting right. What was that balance between saying, wow, I've never had so many resources versus this is work, this is the same as any other
Yeah.
shoot?
It was both. It was both. It was there's a certain level of, when you're in the middle of it all, it is the same as any other, whether it's a $1 million indie film or a, $500 million show. It ultimately is still about storytelling and working with the actors and thinking about what the best way to tell the story is with the camera.
Mm,
Um, that said, when you have the production that we have, the attention to detail on the little things you just would never be able to accomplish on something that didn't have the resources we had was really, really special. The
mm,
prosthetics on the orcs are unbelievable. I mean, and there are multiple prosthetic artists for every orc. So if we had a day where we had 100 orcs on set, we had hundreds of makeup, hair, prosthetic people on set with us. Um, we had people painting the grass green because it got muddy. I mean, I literally I have seen there's scenes, where the stranger walks away over the hill after parting ways with Nori.
yeah.
That was pure mud. And I said it just doesn't look good. We need to figure out something. And they painted it. They painted the hill green, and then visual effects did a little bit of magic too, and voila. But those are the kinds of things that you just you get to have that attention to detail that you
Mm.
wouldn't necessarily be able to have on a smaller production.
And I suppose in some ways it gives you, and this is just me guessing, but I would guess it gives you a little bit more
Yeah,
options in terms of how you want to shoot certain scenes. So, for example, you think about how
yeah.
much prosthetics and practical effects have come on in the last 20 years. You can get your camera right up close to an orc, and no one's sitting there going, oh, I can see the rubber mask and I can see the seams.
Oh
You've
yeah.
got that real fidelity in camera.
Oh yeah, I mean, you didn't have to consider it at all with those with the orcs and with the Harfoots. I mean, they really the prosthetics are so beautifully made,
Mm,
and also the set designs themselves were so intricate. And if you walked around Numenor, you actually see little runes that are in that don't even appear on the show, but they're just there, and there's this kind of incredible reality that's being built around you as
mm.
an infrastructure. and it really opens you up. There were very few times where we said, hey, we can only really look this direction because this is all we've built,
Mm,
or um,
yeah,
we also had the resources to move the camera how we wanted to move the camera. In lighting, we could create effects. The that beginning of episode 7, that is a setup that is very intricate and complicated and expensive.
yeah,
Um, but at the same time, we could do it, which is
sure.
really, I don't take for granted.
No, no, no. Well, I'm sure you don't. But it
Yeah,
sounds like a fantastic experience to have been able to have,
yeah.
so to speak, all those tools and toys to play with. Moving kind of, I know we've been talking quite broadly, but I want to kind of talk about obviously those two specific episodes. One of the
Mhm.
things I've always loved about Tolkien, and this goes for the books, the films, and now the Rings of Power, is that despite all the fantasy elements, there's always an underpinning of horror. Quite often throughout episodes, throughout scenes, there are whether it's imagery that is evocative of horror films, whether there's lines, whether there's music, and it was something that I noticed as well in your episodes, particularly in episode 6, obviously with the battle. There's the brilliant shot of the villager looking out of the inn, and then something just comes past the window. You have the brilliant scene with the Harfoots and the Mystics, where they're coming in through the dark and then appearing behind. I know, obviously, you've worked on The Exorcist. Is horror filmmaking and that whole aesthetic, has that been a big influence for you that you brought into the production as well?
That's a good question. I don't think it was conscious
Mm,
in terms of for my own personal experience. I think again, it's always about um, what are we trying to say in the scene. I do think I have kind of gone through a trial of fire of shooting 10 episodes of a horror television show. So I certainly have tricks that I can pull out of my pocket that I know work. But in terms of for our episodes, it was in the scripts, about the building tension and how we can do that, especially the idea of waiting for something to happen, which the films
mm,
did brilliantly too. I mean,
yes.
in the Return of the King and all that. And there's this a parallel there with the villagers, waiting for the orcs who they know are
Mm,
coming, uh, and the idea of the kind of calm before the storm.
mm,
Um, from a visual perspective, I wanted to push it pretty dark in the sense that the whole scene was kind of this moonlit scene, and it was only when the torches arrived where it transformed into something a bit more kind of dynamic and bright. And the
yeah.
idea being, they're sitting in the dark, and there's always this kind of, it's the scariest place for a cinematographer to sit is a moonlit night because how dark is too dark, how bright is too
Yes.
bright. The worst thing you can do is overlight it and make it feel fake.
Mm,
But also you want your audience to see what's happening. You don't want them to be unsure, and because that will take them right out of the experience. So yeah, I mean, I think that again, it was just about going step by step through the script, breaking down the sequence a small piece at a time, and figuring out where the tension was, and then
yeah.
how do we kind of squeeze as much out of it as we could.
And you've picked up on something there, which I was going to ask about anyway, but perfect segue in terms
Mm,
of the lighting for that episode and also for episode 7. Obviously, a lot of episode
mm,
7 is either happening at night or in a sort of
mm,
apocalyptic twilight in that, that
mm,
orange colored haze. You said in an interview last year with Awards Radar, you said about how the darker you go in a scene, the more realistic it feels. But if you go too dark,
yeah,
the audience is going to see it, and there's that fine line.
yeah.
Just wondering, with it being a fantasy show, is there an element as well that's, how can I put this, that you actually don't want to aim for maximum realism? If the cinematography and the visuals of a fantasy show feel too realistic, feel too much like you could step through the camera, is that, and this
Mm.
kind of goes beyond lighting, but is there that danger where you move away from the fantastical and into the realist?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point. It's a really fine balance because I think um, you don't. Yeah, I really believe, yeah. I mean, when you're shooting fantasy, you don't want to feel like it's a documentary. There's still an elegance to the imagery, I think, that you want to capture because you want it to be a world where people can, kind of escape into.
Mm,
But at the same time, you need to have enough reality to your images and feeling the kind of the grit of it to convince the audience that could be a real place, right?
mm,
And that I think if it's too um, polished and too perfect, it also starts to become, it feels false,
mm.
and you don't. Um, I think as an audience member, as somebody who loves this genre as well, the thing that was such an amazing thing about the first trilogy was that you felt like there's texture to it. They shot on film, all the props were real, and you
Yeah.
know, there's a real groundedness to the imagery, actually, even though there's still elements of real fantasy and big shafts of moonlight and all these things. It
Mm,
always kind of came back to this real um, kind of, they created a world that you could live in that felt
mm.
real. And I think that was our goal. That's always my goal when I'm making anything, is to create a world where that feels authentic to the story we're trying to tell.
Well, and as you said a minute ago, it felt a lot, especially in that episode, the use of torchlight, of firelight. Obviously, as you kind of brilliantly talked about, that opening scene with Adar giving his speech to the orcs, and it's all lit by torchlight. Then when they come to the village, and then later when the villagers attack by setting the cart, I think it is, on fire, there's that kind of sense. There's something so primal and kind of basic about firelight, but I imagine it probably also creates new challenges when you're filming with a lot of real fire in camera, not just
Yeah.
health and safety.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just from a practical point of view, the torches only lasted about a minute and a half at full kind of brightness.
Mm,
And so, all of a sudden we'd be rolling a little bit longer than that, and everything would get a little darker and a little darker and a little, and all of a sudden you have, an image that it's underexposed and doesn't really work. So, but there were so many orcs that, you had to have a huge team of people running in there and lighting these things up.
mm,
So just, yeah, from a practical point of view, it was difficult. And then also, when they were all off, it was somewhat hard to see. I mean, I tried to underexpose the moonlight, so it is pretty dark. It's a huge swath of land. The amount of light I actually had was enormous.
mm,
The goal of it is always to feel like it's sourceless, that you can't tell necessarily where the light's coming from. But that actually requires an enormous amount of light, bringing the whole village and big construction cranes overhead with lights on them and all sorts of stuff. Um, and then, yeah, so from a logistics point of view, and obviously a health and safety point of view, because the village is made out of thatch roofs and wood
yeah,
and
you could
foam.
really burn it down
So
if you're not
there's
careful.
Yeah, and the prosthetics are,
Oh
they're not exactly the safest
no.
necessarily, I think. I mean, but we had a great safety team. I mean, it
Mm,
was amazing. They did such a good job. The stunt coordinators were incredible.
mm,
Um, and everything, like in those kinds of sequences, everything has to be so planned out, so
sure.
buttoned up. We had a cardboard version of the village that we could walk little toys around, and
Yeah.
then we had a bigger version that we could walk around, and then we had the real thing we obviously walked around, and the stunt team performed and practiced for weeks in advance for all of that. So
That's another great aspect of that episode I wanted to talk about. One of the things that I found so engaging about it was how visceral the action felt, and how, there's no better word for it, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to use it, but how meaty the action felt. And I think there's always that thing as a viewer when watching action sequences. You want to get that sense of movement and pace and kind of kinetic dynamism, but also you don't want to sit there with a shaky camera cutting every 1 second, not really being able to talk about. And I think about, the great scene you shot with a Rondir having his one-on-one fight with the orc, and I assume that was incredibly complex to plan. But how do you go about designing, obviously working with the stunt and the fight choreographers, how do you go about planning the filming of those action sequences?
yeah, Yeah, I think first and foremost during any action scene, our ethos was to always have a point of view and make sure that we always had a perspective, whose character's perspective are we in, because we were juggling a lot of different characters, and like you said, it could get very confusing if you were just constantly cutting back and forth and you were kind of trying to help the action by shaking the camera a lot. So it started early on with kind of mapping the whole thing out from the 1,000 foot view. Oh, we used overhead maps. We draw. Okay, this person's here. This person's here. You know, person A goes here. Person B goes here. How does this all work? Where is it in space? And then who's looking at who, especially at the beginning. And then once that's all figured out, the stunt team would take that information. They would start rehearsing some of the scripted beats. They would also pitch other, actions that maybe weren't in the script.
Mm.
They were, we had a great stunt coordinator, and then we also had a great second unit director, Vic Armstrong, who's a legendary stunt man. He was Indiana Jones. He was Harrison Ford's stunt double for many years. So he has seen it all. He's done it all.
Yeah.
And so his unit and Charlotte and my unit, we kind of split up the action in that scene. Um, so, for instance, when Arandir gets pulled off the roof,
Mm.
that was practiced over and over again. We went to the rehearsals. I recorded it with my phone, figuring out where the best angle was for the camera to feel that impact. We buried a mat in the ground, like a gymnastics mat. So they dug a big hole, put the mat in, then put grass back on top of it. And so when he lands, he's actually landing on the ground, but there's an 8-inch mat underneath it. And then we used the key for that sequence, which wanted to feel like one shot. We used strategic wipes. So that's a stunt guy falling off the roof. You know, Orc wipes past all of a sudden, and now it's Ismail. He stands up, and our big boy Orc comes in, and
Yeah.
the rest of the sequence plays out. And so Charlotte and I shot that whole first part: him up on the roof, him falling off the roof, him backing up into our giant Orc, and then actually Pete Field, who is my second unit cinematographer, great cinematographer, and Vic Armstrong, director. Their unit took over and did all the middle part of that fight. So that's a trick. He has to match my lighting, and they have to match the pace of the movements and everything. So that was we really talked about everything ahead of time.
Mm.
And then Charlotte and I picked it up at the very end again after Ismail has been pinned against the well, and so now we're the reverse shot of the thing going to his eye and all that. That was back with the first unit. So it was a combination of two full units, and we do those things for schedule reasons, right? I mean, like in an ideal world, Charlotte and I would just shoot the whole thing, but we had so much else to shoot. We have, you know, I think we were even shooting daytime work while they were shooting nighttime work. It was a huge puzzle piece to fit everything together on that show. So that's why those things happen. And, thankfully we had such an amazing team working alongside us, to kind of, when you watch it, you don't know that that's a
No.
completely different film crew shooting the middle of that scene, you know?
And I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of, I skipped over this a little bit at the start, but one of the things that's brilliant about the show, I think, is that obviously there's three different directors. Obviously, you had J.O. Boner, doing that fantastic opening two episodes. You had yourself, Charlotte, you had
Yep.
Wayne Yip. And yeah, I watched
Yep.
those 8 episodes, and yes, I can tell where, Joe Boner might favor a certain thing, or Charlotte might favor another. The Dutch angles in
Hmm.
episode 6, very distinct. Or the slow motion that Wayne Yip uses was always kind of very
Yep.
noticeable. But at the same time, there is that distinct unifying visual style, and feels like you're in the same world all the way throughout. Was there a lot of conversations between you and the other directors and cinematographers, or was it just a kind of grown understanding through working all the departments?
Yeah, it actually wasn't as much. I don't. I usually come from a world where I'm starting the show,
Hmm.
so I hadn't experienced too much of the kind of what is it like to come in and talk to the previous cinematographers and directors. So I didn't really know what to expect. We didn't actually have as much interaction as I thought we would.
Mm,
They were so JA and his cinematographer Oscar had already left. They when by the time I arrived, so I never actually met them. Um, Wayne and Aaron, his cinematographer, they were wonderful, but they were so busy. They were,
sure.
that we had a few conversations, but otherwise they were like in up to their eyeballs in shooting, and so really it came down to us just coming in and kind of absorbing all of this incredible artisan,
Mm,
made props and costumes and production design and all these incredible things, which in turn, inform the show of what the show really is and what it looks like. There's uh, and then the leadership of Patrick and JD, um, and Lindsay Weber and all everyone else involved at the top. They're so wonderful and they're so enthusiastic and they're great communicators.
mm,
Um, and so it was kind of that combination of you had the people who were kind of guiding the story, and then you have the people making the things that are going to appear on screen. And when you walk into something like that, it made it much easier to kind of feel as a whole, and even though there were multiple teams
sure.
working on it at the same time.
That's something I wanted to ask about as well. Is I think the
Mhm.
the very concept of a showrunner is almost something that's for an audience it's quite nebulous, isn't you don't really know what
Yeah.
it means, but from the sounds of it, from what you've said and from what other folks have said, JD and Patrick were almost the kind of interweaving current that brought this all together. Bringing all these disparate departments and shooting crews and film crews and
Hmm.
actors. What was your experience like working with
Yeah.
them in terms of that collaborative project?
Oh, they're superheroes. I mean, those guys are the amount of pressure they're under, the amount of work they do, the and yet they like the enthusiasm and the grace in which they work, and it's such a treat working with them. They're some of my favorite people I've ever worked with because um, they understand um, their responsibility. They are fans of
Mm,
Tolkien. They are fans of cinema, and they know that they have this monumental task, and they put their hearts and soul into it. It's so hard to make anything.
yeah.
Never mind the biggest kind of undertaking that's ever TV has ever seen, in a beloved franchise. And they were such generous leaders, um, and really made it a great place to go to work, and encouraging and uh, really open-minded.
Mm.
They trusted the people who were there making the filming with them. So
Mm.
yeah,
Fantastic. It's so great to hear. And as well, yeah, I mean, I don't think there could be a bigger testament than the fact that you've come back for season two and said, yes, not only will I do it again, I'll do more of that, please, and more time.
yeah,
So
yeah,
good
yeah.
endorsement.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, it really was like it was. I mean, again, coming from somebody who is a fan of this world of Middle Earth,
Mm.
it was a dream to go live in that world. But then to actually go through the experience, it was one of the best experiences of my life.
Oh,
It really was.
that's so
Yeah,
wonderful to hear, especially for friends on the
yeah,
outside. Yeah, we're all so grateful that it's back. But, in a way, it wouldn't mean as much if the people involved weren't also enjoying it because there's something, where to a certain extent we can be disconnected from the process. But I have felt all along since I saw the very first images from the show, as you've kind of said, the level of detail care from the prop makers to the artists to everyone involved has just been stunning. And just to quickly return, because there was one question I wanted to ask, and
yeah.
you'll have to forgive me because this is such a specific question, but
Yeah.
we discussed this a while ago in the community. We were doing a rewatch of the episodes, and we got to episode 6, and a lot of us said one of my favorite scenes is the scene with Arondir and Bronwyn, where they finally have their moment of kind of, opening up to each other, declaring their love to each other, in all but words in many ways. And it's this beautifully shot scene where they place their hands on the tree and then they finally kiss. And in the moment of the kiss, the camera pans back and we get a wide shot. And it's a very nitpicky question, but I'm just interested in the process, really. What was the kind of decision behind, in that moment, deciding to draw back away from them with the camera?
It's an interesting question because I mean, that was, I actually don't, I couldn't give you a full answer
I
on, I
appreciate
can
it was
kind
a
of
long time
get, I can
ago.
tell you my best, well, I can tell you my best guess because the thing is we shot the scene, they kiss in a wide shot, and we
Mm,
also got a close up of the kiss. So they could
yes,
have, in the editing, they could have lingered on the close up as well.
sure, right.
Um, I think what it did, from a storytelling point of view, was kind of have this finality to the scene and this kind of lingering, what's next and what's at stake. This is kind of potentially, a kind of goodbye, a last moment. We don't know what's going to happen that night, right?
Yes,
But we know something bad is going to happen, as a viewer. And so I think you just jump out and it gives you a chance to, um, sit with it for a moment and just
mm,
think about what's at stake. But again, like that's something that would be my interpretation of it. But again, we did shoot, like we shot both ways, so they could
yeah.
have used just the close up.
No, it's fascinating. It just came to my mind because I knew we were going to talk about these 2 episodes, and it's a conversation that I've had
Mm,
with various people. But I think it's one of the beautiful things about filmmaking is A, that it's still open to interpretation, even for those who worked behind the camera, but
yeah,
be that
yeah,
you could have edited it another way, you could have filmed it another way. But I think it's a beautiful scene itself. It was just an interesting one. I did want to ask. I know we're kind of running towards the end of our
yeah.
time shortly, but across those 2 episodes, do you have a scene or two that was your favorite to film, whether it was a big moment or a small, quiet, personal moment?
It's a good question. Oh, I will say one more thing really quick
Sure.
before we move on. I just thought about the other thing that we were conscious of, and the reason why we put that scene there.
Mm.
The scene wasn't. I don't remember if it was scripted
Oh
back
wow.
there. It might have been, but it's a throwback to the very beginning of the season where they meet by the well, you
Yes.
know. And so there's also this full circle moment and just showing that environment again. And here they are after kind of going through what they've gone through. There's just a moment to sit with that. So I'd say that as well for why you might want to jump out wide again.
Sure.
In terms of my favorite scene to film, gosh, there were great, a lot of great scenes. I actually think my so the I'd say the most challenging scenes were the end of 6 and the beginning of 7, right? So the explosion of Mount Doom and the beginning of the aftermath, and I'm really proud of those scenes. But actually, my favorite scene is, Galadriel and Theo under the log at
Oh,
night.
I could not agree with you more. That scene for me is almost the heart of the show in another way.
It is. It truly is, and I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now because I remember, you know, sitting there as, um, Morfydd is delivering those lines,
Mm,
and it's that first moment where you feel her inner self
mm.
and kind of letting that come to the surface just a little bit. And it's a simple scene visually. I mean, in terms of there's no fancy shots. It's very, you know, I'm very happy with how the scene turned out in the moonlight and the encroaching orcs and all that. But it's quite simple.
Yes.
But there's something about her performance and his performance and this kind of relationship that they form over the course of that episode that has so much soul to it and, um, gives you that little bit of crack into her,
Mm,
her inner world that I love. And there's moments when you're filming these things, like, we're not, we're as fans and as human beings, even though it's it's my job, it's like there's moments on set of just magic, and that you just feel it, and you just you're just taken with it, just like the audience you hope will be.
Yeah. No,
So yeah,
I mean, I think episode 7 for me, it's one of my favorite episodes of the season because it has all these small moments which tell you so much. The Galadriel and Theo conversation, Elrond and Durin's farewell is one of the most
yeah,
tear-jerking emotional scenes, which has about
yeah,
6 lines of dialogue. It's just beautiful. You have
yeah,
and
yeah.
to kind of go to the extreme with that is Nori and the Stranger's farewell with the apple, where there's not a line
Mhm.
spoken, but it's all just told
Yeah,
visually. And Daniel's performance all throughout the season, obviously being largely non-verbal, just magnificent.
yeah. He's amazing. He paid such close attention to his physical performance, and he had such a challenging job because he also had to work with body doubles,
Of course.
and he knew, as an actor who's you're getting everything through his physicality because
Mm,
he doesn't have words. And so he had the challenge of also not only doing it himself, but then kind of coaching his body doubles to make sure that it felt right and that they were kind of doing what he would do.
mm.
Um, so it was no easy task. He really, people don't fully understand how difficult I think that is, and he did such a marvelous job.
Well, I think the same with all the scenes in Khazad-dûm where Robert Aramayo and Owain Arthur are there, often playing against
Yeah,
not their
they're
actual
awesome.
opposing number, and yet they're giving these
Oh
performances
yeah.
where you're thinking this is their best friend in the world, and they might be looking at a cardboard cutout
Uh,
on someone's backpack.
exactly. Oh, they are so fun to shoot with too. My gosh, that's a fun relationship. That relationship is as fun in person as
Yeah,
it is in the show, for
I,
sure.
it really
Yeah.
comes across in an interview, and I imagine in terms of number of scenes where the cast break out laughing, those two have probably got to be pretty high near the top.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Oline is hysterical. They're both funny, but Oline is he is a funny guy, and he has a yeah. I mean, the cast is brilliant. They're such good people,
Mm.
um, who really care. I couldn't have asked for a better film family to go on the journey with, for
Oh,
sure.
that's fantastic. Well, I know I don't
Yeah.
have much more time left with you, so let me just run through a couple of quick fire questions if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Episode 7, Halbrand
hmm
disappears for most of the episode and then reappears with a stab wound. Now, you may not be able to answer this, but I thought I'd ask anyway. Was there a scene that you shot where you saw how he was stabbed?
Um, no, no.
No, no scene shot.
Did we? I'm trying to remember. No, I don't think we shot a scene. I'm trying. It's been a long time now. No, no, nope.
Okay. All right.
We never shot a scene with him getting stabbed. Nope,
No.
nope.
Okay. All right. Good to know. People will be interested to hear that. Second
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Obviously, you were involved in working on the show, and you filmed 2 of the episodes, but then you obviously got to sit and watch it as a viewer. Did you have a
yeah,
favorite episode or scene, even if it was yours? You can say yours if you'd like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I really, um, well, I said the scene under the tree is, I
Yeah.
think, my favorite scene of the season. I just love it. I think and it's not because of my contribution. It's just the writing and the acting. I just love that. I love that
Sure.
scene. Um, I mean, really, it's so hard to say. I don't want to be boring,
That's okay.
but I mean, I really am proud of the season. And I think every episode offers something different. Um,
Definitely.
and I do think I feel fortunate to have had these 2 episodes that really, um, you know, the kind of the car had been started and it is going now. And so
Yes.
by the time I'm joining the party, everything is really going at full steam ahead. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening.
Mm.
I was very happy at the end of it, seeing the beginning of episode 7, that it came out the way I had in my head, in terms of we had gotten it pretty close on set, but of course there's elements to it that you just can't do for safety
Sure.
reasons. And I think the visual effects department totally knocked it out of the park, creating the swirling ash and all this stuff.
Can I say on that, one of my favorite shots of the whole season, and it appeared in a trailer early on, and it was kind of burned into my mind ever since, is the shot of Galadriel's eye opening, covered in ash, but it's upside down and inverted, and so it's this kind of
Yeah,
unnerving image of an eye opening in the red light. That, I think, I mean,
yeah.
that must have been, I don't know how close you had to get to shoot that, but what a shot.
It was very close. And it was actually funny because I have a behind the scenes photo of that setup because
Mm.
the next shot in the sequence is something that I had come up with where to disorient the viewer, we'd start upside down, track up her body, rotate the camera as she's sitting up, and kind of um, to do that we needed to be on this telescopic crane with this big remote camera head, and it's a big piece of equipment.
Yeah.
But to save time, we just said, well, we'll just use that tool for this first shot, which is the eye.
Mm.
So we have Morphet lying on the ground. I had big piece of white card cut into a circle, so you get a circular reflection in her eye. That was just picking up the light around that I had light, around the set. But then we have this huge crane and the camera just like hovering about 3 inches from her face. So it's a pretty funny setup because it was a lot of gear for like a little tiny shot.
Yeah. And just to confirm for the listeners, you didn't actually set a horse on fire and make it run through the shot, did you?
We didn't. What we did do, we made a custom LED blanket.
Oh,
Um, so
wow.
what we did, yeah. So I literally covered the horse's back with LED lights that were the color of fire, right? So that way they still like if you look closely on this horse's skin, you can see
Yes.
there's interactive light, right? It's the best way to sell. If you can't use fire, you still should put light in the place of where the fire would be,
Yes.
because fire emits light. So it's the best way to get realistic fire. So we did do that. They had to train the horse to run with that. They also had to, it was not an easy shot to accomplish because the horse, for safety reasons, could only go a certain speed
Sure.
because there was real fire on set. There was smoke in the air. It was not a very pleasant place for a horse to be, but it was safe. But it was just they had to be
Yes, of course.
careful. So yeah, that's how we did it.
That see, I hadn't thought. I part of me just thought, oh, that's just a digital horse, probably. But even better that it's a horse with a cozy blanket on it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
comforting.
a blanket with LED lights all over it. Yep.
Fantastic. Right. Well, I will really
Yep.
start to wrap up now. Alex, I know you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to tell us anything about season two. Don't worry. I know that the Amazon snipers are just behind my window there. But as
Yeah.
you said,
No.
you have returned the show as lead cinematographer. Obviously, Charlotte's Brandstrom's doing 4 episodes this year. So, without talking about
Yeah.
anything specifically, what's that experience been like returning? As you said, a longer shoot. This time you're in the UK. How's that been?
Yeah, again, I mean, and it was another incredible experience. It was really, yeah, I mean, it was a really long shoot. It was a real marathon.
Mm,
Um, but again, I hope people are going to be very happy with what we've done. I'm so proud of it. We've done so much good work. Um, and the storytelling is really good. And yeah, I can't say anything else, but I
no.
had another fantastic experience, and again, best family I could ask for.
Oh, fantastic. And, I know
Yeah,
you won't be able to answer this, so I'll just say this and let the viewers know if Alex makes a funny face. But of course, on The Exorcist, you worked with the wonderful Ben Daniels, who joined the Rings of Power
yes,
cast in season 2. Did you get to
yeah.
work much with Ben this season, Alex?
I worked with Ben. I love Ben. He's an amazing guy. That's all I'm going to say.
That's all
He's
you're
a
going to
great
say.
dude.
Okay, we'll cut now.
Yeah,
No.
yeah,
But no, that's brilliant. I'm very excited. I'm a big fan of Ben as well. Very excited to see him. Alex, listen, I've taken an hour of your time. This has been such a fantastic conversation for me. I really do appreciate your time, your insights, all your stories about season 1. I hope you'll come back after season 2 to talk with us again. But importantly, is there anything else you're working on at the moment that listeners should know about?
I'm just about to start a little mini series for HBO. It's a totally different genre. It's like a crime drama.
Okay.
Um, but I'm really excited about it. Something different. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we'll keep an eye out for the next Alex Disenhof lensed production. And once again, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And that, dear listeners, is the end of my interview with Alex Disenhof. I want to once again extend a massive thank you to Alex. Firstly, for being so polite and even acknowledging my messages to him, and more importantly, for setting an hour aside just before Christmas to come and talk with me. As I'm sure you can tell, Alex was a delight to talk to, and I hope that you found all his stories and insights from the production of Season 1 to be as interesting as I did. Obviously, I knew I wouldn't be able to ask for any secret information about Season 2, but I really am delighted that Alex returned for the filming of the second season, and I can't wait to see his work on screen next year. I would also like to say that speaking with Alex and hearing all about the long journey it took to bring the Rings of Power to our screens has definitely reignited my desire to get back to releasing episodes of this podcast on a more regular basis. Now I know what you might think. We've heard that one before. And I know I broke my promise to bring all of you kind listeners plenty of content in the off-season. And for that, I do apologise. Especially to those of you that have always encouraged and supported me throughout the last year. It has always been appreciated. And I hope this time I'm not only back on the podcasting horse, but I can stay in the saddle. But as we head into 2024, and are, no doubt, only a short time away from the marketing and promotion machine roaring into life for Season 2, I do hope that I can start to deliver these episodes more frequently. I'm looking forward to discussing all the new characters we'll meet, the places we'll visit, and the stories we might see in Season 2. And most importantly, I just want to close the episode by wishing all of you a very happy holidays. And I hope that 2024 is filled with unexpected happiness and joy for each and every one of you. But for today, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back soon for another episode of the Daily Rings of Power podcast. Namarie.